In 2015, Ta-Nehisi Coates released his critically acclaimed novel, Between the World and Me. The book discusses racial equity through the lens of a father speaking to his son about the realities of race and being Black in America. For today's guest, who has a history of activism, change management, and diversity, equity, and inclusion education and advocacy, the title was an immediate yes. Join me and Eric Washington, speaker, writer, advocate, and leader, as we discuss the realities of race in America and what it will finally take to experience freedom and the pursuit of happiness for all. During this episode, we discuss Eric's career as a change maker in today's society and how others can integrate equitable practices into their work and lives. This was one of my favorite episodes. I feel like this one spoke to me on a different level. For those who know racial equity is my passion, and I really think a huge part of my life purpose. So I'm excited to learn from Eric as he shared his passion and purpose for racial equity with us, as well as diversity, equity, and inclusion. As you all know, DEI has come under fire recently, so this episode is more pertinent than ever. I encourage you, whether you are a diversity, equity, inclusion practitioner or not, to listen to this episode, soak in the wisdom, and grow with us, because this is The Purposeful Professional. Let's go. Hello, everybody. This is Soraya. I just want to wish you all a happy new year from The Purposeful Professional and give you all a quick update at the beginning of the episode before we get into the content. So really exciting. TPP is building out the team. We also have a very small rebrand. We'll be referring to ourselves as Purposeful Professional Media, but I'm really, really excited about this next chapter. I'm excited for consistent episode uploads. I'm excited for the growth of the brand. And if you hear us being quiet, it's because we're building. I think this is a season of building. From October to January, I was on a sabbatical, trying to figure things out, working and trying to get things done. So please stay with us, listen, and grow with us. Happy New Year. We're so excited to have you all in the Purpose Cyphers fam. And yes, let's get into this content. All right, take care.
Okay, hey everyone. Can't access my video. Okay, now they can. Hey everyone. My name is Soraya Walters. I'm the host of the Personal Professional Podcast, and today I have a great guest with me to discuss the topic of Between the World and Me: social justice, grassroots movements, and the pursuit of happiness. Welcome to the podcast, Eric Washington. Eric, please introduce yourself to the people on the podcast.
Hey everyone, happy to be here. I'm Eric Washington, he, him pronouns, and I am excited to be here. In my day job, I'm a DEI practitioner in educational spaces, and I also volunteer a lot in organizing spaces. So I'm excited to talk about all the things grassroots organizing and DEI, and I'm just happy to be here and share my time with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, cool. So let's just hop straight into it. When I say the words diaspora, liberation, and social justice, what comes to mind for you?
Oh, I love that question. For that, that means nobody is free until everybody's free. I think of Fannie Lou Hamer. I think of the Black Queer Feminist Lens. I think of the Combahee River Collective. I think of Asada Shakur. I mean, I think of so many great Black feminist thought practitioners and thought manifestors. Yeah, I just think that when we talk about liberation in the Black diaspora, it means all Black people are free, right? No matter what their class, what their city, what their country, what their identities are, right? Any intersectional identity that Black folks may have, I think that, no one is free until we all are free. I love that question so much.
Yeah, okay. I like that. That's powerful. So no one is free until we all are free. What gives you that desire to see everyone free? Because I think even within the Black community, we're so segregated oftentimes. And I think in every POC community, there's a lot of inter community conflict, or intra community, my bad, conflict between people within the community. So what makes you have this desire to see everyone be free?
Oh, wow. I love that question so much. I think about, we live in this world right now where like soft life is an aesthetic, right? Where soft life is kind of almost commodified for content or for clout, right? But I think overall, seeing the power of what a soft life could be for Black folks is what a portion of liberation can look like. And when we think of soft life, I don't think of it in terms of class or necessarily even comfort, right? But more so as then the ability to live, breathe, and thrive. I mean, if we talk about all of these um, police brutality instances, I mean, literally the right to breathe, right? The right to just be on, like, mind our own business and do what we, want to do on a daily basis, and not fear any reprimand for that. And so that's getting a little into the more extreme, but reality of it. It is extreme, but it is a reality. But I think when I think of liberation and when I think of soft life for Black folks, I think of a future. I think of a future where there's housing. I think of a future where there is education, where there's healthcare, where there is not a need for capital, right? I mean, where there isn't a need to participate in a system that we have to sell our labor, right? Or we have to work to live, right? I talk to my boss all the time, and they always talk about how for them, they would just love to wake up, have coffee or tea for however long until it's done, just sitting outside having coffee or tea until it's done, not having to rush to go into work, or not having to rush to take care of something in the house. And I can go on and on about that, but I think a small portion, because we can talk about policy, we can talk about what like real liberation looks like, but I think a small portion of that really just means that Black folks can just live a softer life, or a soft life.
Oh my God. Okay. So I'm like, okay, so Eric did not just use the soft life to talk about the Black experience in America. But no, I love that, because it's like, wow, so you're taking this thing that's so popular, this soft life thing, even for men, the soft life has become very popular. It's like, hey, mentally I'm checked out. Some people have just become digital nomads. They no longer work in a location. They're traveling and they're living life. But at the same time, you're bringing attention to the fact that, is the soft life really commodified? Is it something we can purchase and buy? Vacations, clothes, shoes, bags, cars? Or is it the ability to breathe? Is it the ability to feel human? I think of all the time, like the 3/5 of a man compromise. The fact that for many years, and even today in the society, many of us are not even really seen as human. So I think that you're helping us to reclaim that side of ourselves that exists and deserves to exist fully. And I think that's an amazing, amazing, amazing point that you made. 100%. Yeah.
Well, thank you for the kind words. And I love the way you put it, not only to exist, but to exist fully. I mean, it's one thing just to be here, right? And even if you are one of those people who subscribes to soft life as an aesthetic, right? The vacations, the checking out, the digital nomads, all of that, right? But at the end of the day, existing fully, what does that mean? And it may mean different things to different people, right? Different things, especially like we're talking about, to different Black folks. But to exist fully, I think, is the key word, not just exist, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's making me think of the fact that I remember in the 2020 pandemic, the George Floyd shooting, and then we had also dealt with the aftermath of the death of Ahmaud Arbery, and, rest in peace, rest in power to these individuals, and the fate that they had suffered. But I remember there's this song, I Just Want to Live, and it went viral. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it. There's a remix with Andra Day and Dr. Dre. It just went viral, and it was a young Black man. He was singing, I just want to live. And I think that's what you're bringing us back to. Like, we deserve to live. And unfortunately, the condition that some of us are in, we don't feel as if we can live fully. Bills have weighed us down. Gentrification has weighed us down. Voter suppression has weighed us down. And the list goes on and on and on and on. So thank you for, that's why I really wanted to have this conversation with you, because I feel like you have a gift for explaining these things in a way that people can get it, because like you use the soft life to talk about what we're going through today. That's amazing. I would have never thought of that leap. So thank you for like making that leap for us and the listeners, so we can recognize, hey, like, do I have a soft life? Maybe not. Let's look at the systems. Let's look at the structures. Let's look at the things around me. How can they help me to become softer, rather than me taking the day off and, going to Dubai, for example?
Yes, I love that. And thank you for the kind words. But yes, the way that you emphasize my points, I wish I could emphasize it the way you do. But yes, it goes beyond like what we have, right? Our liberation goes beyond what commodities we have or what luxuries we have. But if you didn't have those luxuries, if you didn't have those commodities, if you couldn't take your trip to Dubai, or if you didn't have your unlimited PTO, would you be really liberated after that? Right. So when all those things are gone, what does liberation look like? Because not everyone wants
Yeah.
to go to Dubai. Not everyone wants unlimited PTO. You know, some people are just looking for housing, like looking for a place they can stay day and night. Some people are just looking for health care, right? Some people are looking for reproductive justice. Some people are looking for a decriminalization of whatever charge that they got when they were 15 years old and they're still incarcerated, right? So what
Yeah.
does liberation look like? What does this quote soft life look like for all Black people?
Yeah. Oh, come on. That's it. What does it look like for all of us? Exactly. So I remember when I met you and you told me that you're a Mac PGOT aspirant. And immediately my mind went to like, who is a Black man that I can say can get a Mac PGOT or is on his way right away because he has a MacArthur. I thought of Ta-Nehisi Coates right away, and you kind of remind me of him. There might be feelings around that, but you kind of do remind me of him, and I was like, okay, like I thought of Ta-Nehisi Coates right away, and I thought of his book Between the World and Me, which talks about race and racism through the eyes of a Black father speaking to his son. And I wanted to ask you, like, what is your favorite book on race and race relations? And then how did this book change or challenge your pre-existing worldview?
Oh gosh, that is such a great question. It has been a while since I read Between the World and Me, and that is a phenomenal book. Even the excerpts that I do remember. But I think I would say my favorite book on this topic, and I would say it's my favorite because even still, it's been a while since I read it, but it really framed my view and really got me into organizing spaces. But it is Unapologetic by Charlene Carruthers, and it is, in some ways, it's a reader. In some ways, it's a manual. In some ways, it's a collaboration, if you will, on what it looks like to subscribe to the Black queer feminist lens. And to boil it all down, because Black queer feminist lens, all those terms can be polarizing, right? Even now, right? But really, what it means is, what does it mean to center the marginalized? And I don't want to take us rewind us back to the previous topic, but like when we talk about liberation, it really could be any liberation, because I'm focused on Black liberation, but there are going to be other people who are focused on Latina liberation, Asian liberation, Pacific Islander liberation, Indigenous liberation. But at the end of the day, what does it mean to center those margins? Because if you ask anybody who, we would call them radical thinkers, but it's not so radical anymore, I would argue. Not to say that those thoughts aren't ahead of its time, but I would say that society and people in organizing spaces, it's growing into accepting more of these radical thoughts. So that is to say, when you ask someone, what does movement spaces, what do organizing spaces historically look like? Well, they'll say, well, historically they centered Black cis hetero men, right? That was the kind of like the face of equality, the face of movement spaces. And then they would go on to tell you all of these, movements that have been led by women, that have been led by queer folks, gender expansive folks, gender non-conforming folks, even in a time where it may have not even been thought of to label these things as, or these people rather, as gender expansive, gender non-binary. So I say that to say is that book, Unapologetic by Charlene Carruthers, is an amazing book on what it looks like to subscribe to a lens that centers the margins, to make sure that when we're talking about liberation and we're looking at who is at the table, and this is, I'm borrowing from Charlene, when we look at who's at the table, who's not at the table, right? Who's not in the decision-making room when we're talking about liberation.
Yeah. Oh, let me tell you. Woo. Okay. Wow. Okay. No, but that's fire. And I really do love that. I want to jump in and talk about my book that has really impacted me. So what I think I heard about The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander when I was in college. And that book, alongside 13th, the documentary by Ava DuVernay, has had a huge impact on how I see this entire system. I began to realize the school to prison pipeline is real. And it's funny because my first class in college was on the school to prison pipeline, my first education class. So I was a business major, but I was an education minor. And that was on the school to prison pipeline, the whole entire class. And it's almost like I got my wake up call right away. At the time, I was living in West Philadelphia, which is one of the most gentrified cities in the country. And I was realizing that, man, like my life matters more than just to me. It matters to so many other people and so many other people that look like me. So when I began learning about the prison industrial complex and, the clause in the 13th Amendment that indicates that, basically, if you are a prisoner, you can be equated to a slave. When I began to learn about these things, it challenged me. It challenged me. And that was at like not 16, that was at like 17 years old. It challenged me to start thinking really hard about what my place in the society is. So I love the fact that we can find inspiration from literature. And I think like naming this episode Between the World and Me is an ode to that, because we can find so much inspiration in books. And I would encourage anyone, like, read. Open your mind, read, like get it into your mind. Like some things cannot be a movie or a podcast. Read, and challenge yourself with those ideas. I'd 100% say that. So I want to switch to your upbringing in the South, which we've had a conversation about. And it's funny because I'm like, dang, I feel like your energy is like, do people tell you like you're very like East Coast, like Northeast? Do people think you're from the Northeast?
That's actually really funny. I think I very rarely get that. I think,
Oh,
I
okay.
usually, I think when people hear the y'all, because I don't really have, or people might think I have like a Southern
Okay.
accent. I don't think I have a Southern accent, or what you would think a Southern accent would sound like. But when people hear the y'all, they're like, oh, you're from the South. But I think I've gotten like, people say like I'm very like chill, very laid back. So people will say like a West Coast vibe, or like people will, I don't know, maybe hear me speak and they're like, oh, that sounds sort of like East Coast. But very rarely will I get pinpointed to a region. So it's funny that you mentioned that.
Yeah, no, because and this is gonna sound kind of crazy, but as someone who grew up in the Northeast, a lot of the time we never really would see people from the South as being very, all the Black people as being very, I guess you could say, wanting like change and stuff. And it's kind of like a stereotype that happens, but it's crazy that you grew up in the South and then decided not to sit on what you experienced, but to actually analyze it and process it in your way. And I think a large part of that fuels your activism and what you do. So I'd love to get into that. So tell me about your upbringing, and when did you notice you had a passion for activism? How did growing up in the South impact your activism journey?
Yeah, I love that question. Okay, so growing up in the South, I was raised by my mom and my aunties. My parents got divorced when I was like an infant, so not long after I was born, so maybe 2 or 3. And so I was raised by my mother and her 3 sisters, so 4 women were always in the house at all times. My mother, oh, so correction, my mother was in the military, so she may have not always been in the house at all times, but I was, essentially raised by 4 Black women. And these Black women were from Monahans, Texas. And for anyone's listening who doesn't know where Monahans is, it is near Odessa in Midland. And so if you've ever seen the movie Friday Night Lights, they were familiar with all the real life characters of that movie, Friday Night Lights. So it's a West Texas. It's known for oil. It's desert in the middle of nowhere. So yeah, and people who are listening who are from Monahans might get a little upset at me because I said it's in the middle of nowhere, but because it might have grown since then. I haven't visited in a long time. But that is to say, West Texas. So these women, these 4 women, Melissa, Rose, Sharon, my mother, and Dorothy, were Southern to the bone. They were also Kojic to the bone. So if you don't know what Kojic is, Church of God in Christ, that is a very predominantly Black Pentecostal Christian space. But Kojic to the bone, Southern to the bone. And that is to say that growing up, I've been saying lately in my, at my big age, that I think I've always been kind of like accidentally intersectional, and in my thought process, because my whole entire life was centered around Black women. And so I've always said that, I've kind of learned that, as someone who is very anti-labor, but also very like pro putting your best foot forward, a lot of my chase for accolades and my chase for greatness, if you will, was to honor the 4 Black women who raised me. So I say that to say, to lead in, that I think my first experience of my Blackness, or the first like understanding of what it means to be politicized or radicalized, So I jokingly say it was when I first watched this movie, Undercover Brother, and there's this character in this movie called Conspiracy Brother, and it's played by Dave Chappelle. And basically, he's a stereotype of like I guess you would say. So it was a stereotype of a Black Panther, I guess, but like now it'd be more of a stereotype of like a Hotep person, right? But that was kind of like that.
Yeah.
But he was my favorite character. One, because it was Dave Chappelle, but two, also like he was my favorite character just because I thought that the lines were so funny. And I was watching this as a kid. Probably shouldn't have been watching this as a kid, but it was always on repeat in the house. So I was watching it. And so I jokingly say that was like my start of being politicized. But I seriously would say the start of being politicized was in high school. And it was just by reading. I remember sophomore year, something just clicked. I was 15 years old. Something had just clicked. I don't know if I was reading more. I don't know if I was listening to podcasts more, if I was listening to more like movement music more. I don't remember what the trigger was, but I just remember being more in tune with the world around me, and understanding what the world looks like as an anti-Black world. And I will be the first to say that the world is definitely an anti-Black world. You'll hear people say anti-Blackness is
Yeah.
universal. I completely agree with that. I mean, I feel like society on a worldwide global level has really been built and perpetuated on anti-Blackness, but we'll save that soapbox for later. So I say that to say is that what really politicized and radicalized me was when I was 17 and I witnessed the George Zimmerman verdict after the murder of Trayvon Martin, and that really it came from a place of anger, to be honest, a place of anger and sadness. But that is what really moved me into a desire to learn more and do more in movement spaces and organizing spaces. So that moment really radicalized me in a way that, and actually now that I say that, I do remember that the very first thing that politicized me was the reported murder of Trayvon Martin. Just the reported murder, like just not even leading up to the trial, just the headline of what happened. And then over the course of that year or two is what really caused me to be politicized.
Okay. So I think you're speaking to the fact that number one, representation is needed, right? In media and in culture, because you were able to, through this Dave Chappelle Undercover Brother, actually see, even if it's a spoof, even if it's hotepi, whatever they like to say, you were actually able to see the fact that, hey, like there are ideas outside of maybe what I see in the history books or what I might see in my educational system at the time. There are ideas out there. And I think that's where it starts, with just that curiosity. So yes, representation is so needed, especially when it comes to discussing social topics related to the Black diaspora. But I love how you also talked about the fact that you were able to gain inspiration in so many different ways. So whether it's podcasts, whether it's like books and media, you were able to really gain inspiration. So when that moment happened, when that I have a friend that says it's like a click moment. When that moment happened, when Trayvon Martin had died, there was already work being done in you, so that you knew that now is the time to really mobilize. And I think, like, for anybody who is young and thinking, when is my time going to happen? I'm curious about this issue. I'm curious about this area, but I don't feel like I'm ready to really step up. I know you're going to have your click moment where it's like, hey, this is the time that I need to get up and get out there and do something. So continue to do the work, continue to really study, learn, be around people who are similar to you in wanting to understand and learn and move forward. But I'm also dead at something that you said. I just couldn't keep it to myself. Like, how did we go from like what was considered a Black Panther in maybe the 1960s, 70s to being a hotep in 2023? And that is a whole other conversation. But I had to hold my laughter in because I was like, oh my God, that's hilarious. Nah, that's really
No, I love
hilarious.
that you brought that up. Well, so I mean, this movie came out in the early 2000s, right? Which, I mean, I'm sure there were. I don't think the vocabulary word, or the terminology Hotep was around in the early 2000s. So I think now watching this from a 2020-ish lens, people might be like, oh, that's supposed to be a joke of like a Hotep guy, but I think in the early 2000s, that character, again, the name of the character is Conspiracy Brother. So there's undercover brother, there's smart brother, there's all these other brothers, and then there's conspiracy brother. And very quite literally, the character, the whole point of the character is that he looks at everything, and he's like, oh, this is a conspiracy that, and the main villain is the man, and this is something that the man created to bring down black folks, or this is something that the man something
Oh
for
God.
black folks, and so that's like the whole point of the character. And so that's not to say that, like, obviously the character dresses like a Black Panther, but the mindset is of a Hotep. So that's not to say, I'm glad you brought this up because I want to clarify. This is not to say that Black Panthers are conspiracy brother type people, but this character dressed like a Black Panther, and then from a 2020 standpoint would have the mind of, I guess, a Hotep. So yeah, I'm glad we got to
Yeah.
clarify
Okay.
that, because no, there definitely
Yeah,
no
because
shade
I,
to the
I was
Black
kind of
Panthers.
like,
I am
whoa.
very, very pro Black Panthers, and I'm happy to
Yeah.
say
Oh,
that on recording.
no, I just found that really funny, and I was like, okay, I gotta shout that out because I find that to be really funny. Even the even the term Hotep, there's understanding in every single path, and I do think that Hotep is a derogatory term, as well as some other terms like Uncle Tom. I mean, these are like derogatory terms that we use, and it boils down to like if my expression of blackness is not yours, I'm going to call you
Mm-hmm.
this. And I definitely do not like that at all. But I thought it was funny. I was like, okay, I've never heard of this movie, so it's very funny that like this guy would be considered a Hotep. Okay, but yeah, I just want to also focus on. So you studied race, gender, ethnicity, and gender politics, and then you studied it at Texas A&M. So I think that's really great. I think also your academic interest in studying this field. So you went from kind of like just this upbringing of activism to actually academically studying this field. A lot of us, we care about, I guess you would say we care about the liberation, but studying it is hard for us. And I think that's kind of how I was. Studying it was hard for me. I couldn't study that stuff because it was so deep and personal for me. But I would love to know, like, why race, gender, ethnicity, and gender politics? What drove you to consider that area? And then how was the context of studying that at Texas A&M for
Yeah,
you?
that's a great question. Thank you for that. So I think it all starts with learning the term Black diaspora, and I learned it because one of the very first things I did when I joined A&M, I was just trying to find a community, right? But I was aware of at the time. So I went to A&M from 2012 to 2016, and I was aware at the time that the percentage of Black folks at A&M, not counting international, so they'll count students from, let's say in this case, maybe the Caribbean or West Africa, right? Or not even West Africa, but the Caribbean or Africa, they would count those as international students. They wouldn't count those as Black students. So really what they're saying, and again, at least during this time, I don't know if the policies have changed, but what they're really saying is African American students or Black American citizens or Black American residents. This is what it means to be Black. This is the percentage. And at the time, the percentage always fluctuated between 2% and 3%. And that would be, if you're thinking about a five-figure student population each year coming in, that's not a lot. But then if you think about, 5 figures times four for those that are there for 4 years, or 5 figures times, 6 for people that are there for grad school, I mean, it adds up. So that 2 to 3% is very, very, very small. That is to say, that was one of the first things I was trying to do, was trying to find Black folks. If I'm just being honest, I was just trying to find Black folks to be around. Fast forwarding, I joined this organization called the Woodson Black Awareness Committee. And it was an educational programming committee where essentially we were just trying to raise awareness and create educational programming around issues affecting the Black diaspora. That was like our mission statement, right? And so after learning what the Black diaspora meant, I was like, oh, this is perfect. This is exactly what I want to do. How can I get into helping the Black diaspora? Black people everywhere. And this is before I even was really like learned in like Fannie Lou Hamer and Assata Shakur and all these amazing, thought leaders. I just knew I wanted to help Black people everywhere. I wanted to see Black people win everywhere.
Yeah.
And so what got me into my educational track was like, well, I'm going to get into human rights work. And I don't know if I'm going to be a human rights lawyer. I don't know if I'm going to work for Human Rights Watch or Amnesty International or somebody else. I just want to do human rights work that centers Black people. And so that's really what started my educational journey. So I was like, okay, so this concentration is being offered in the political science department. So political science is my major. And they had all these different concentrations that you could sign up for. You could either do your general political science degree, or you could sign up for concentrations and you get like a little designation on your degree and you get these certificates. So I was like, okay, well, let me sign up for race, gender, ethnic politics. Let me sign up for international relations, and let me sign up for diversity, and then let me sign up for political thought. And I did all those for the purposes of getting into human rights work that centers the Black diaspora. And I did the same thing in grad school when I went back to grad school, back to A&M 2018 to 2020. And I studied international affairs with the hope and the purpose of getting into human rights work for the Black diaspora. And I even added women, peace, and security into my repertoire because it dawned on me, well, if I want to center all Black people, I can't not center half of the population. And even that's not accurate if we're considering gender identity. But for the purposes of the phrase, half the population. So I also added women, peace, and security to my repertoire.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really, number one, that's a thoughtful way to go about your education. And that also speaks to the fact that there's so much necessity for like Black students to have these places to gather on college campuses. And to think that, I'm not sure if you're following the news, but there are some states where that is now in jeopardy. Think about the fact that the college landscape is changing a lot, and even having certain gatherings, people might see it as self-segregation, when rather that was the way that you learned about the diaspora, the way that you began to feel connected to a broader diasporic vision that birthed your academic interests. I really love that, because I think a lot of us, when we go to college, it's like, where can I make the most money? And even those of us who think about money, it's like maybe after years after college, maybe like 15 years later, I will start thinking about the community and helping the community because I need to be successful. And that at its core is Black exceptionalism, right? I can't help anyone unless I am a billionaire. I can't help anyone unless I am a millionaire. So to think that your academic process was so, I guess I could say, like, so socially driven that you weren't even thinking about starting salaries per se. You more so had like something you were going after. I mean, you did name like Amnesty and these big places, but it seemed as if you were in mission driven work. I feel like that doesn't click for a lot of students, specifically a lot of Black students in college. I think a lot of us feel like we have to do what will make us the most money because we think that capitalism is what's going to get us out of this. What would your answer be to someone who is considering studying race, gender, and ethnic politics, but the starting salaries don't look good, the career projections don't look good, and they have more lucrative offers elsewhere or
Yeah,
paths elsewhere?
that's an amazing setup. So I'm definitely a believer that Black capitalism is not going to liberate us. I'm definitely under the understanding of what. So I think everything is more nuanced than what people subscribe it to be. So yes, I do not believe that Black capitalism will save us. I don't believe capitalism will save anyone. First of all, I think that that's completely antithetical to the whole purpose of capitalism. But we're not going to get too much into that. But I don't think Black capitalism will save us. But I understand because people use the monopoly metaphor all the time. Because we've missed 400 turns, because we were barred from doing 400 turns on the Monopoly board, or even longer than that, longer than 400, we'll just say 400 plus. We were barred from doing 400 plus turns on the Monopoly board, that we've been conditioned that we have to, like, whether it's hustle mentality, or whether it's just like, I want to feed my family, or whether it's just like, I want to buy my mom a house, or whether I want to buy, somebody something. I understand the conditioning and the brain hardwire that the Black community, and I'll say the Black diaspora, has been fed and conditioned that, we have to achieve this amount of money, earn this amount of money in order to be better, or in order to serve better, or in order to put my future lineage in a better space. And while I understand that viewpoint, it kind of goes back to what we were talking about previously. If all that is gone, if all that is gone, if you never achieve that, whether it's by barriers, whether it's by this hustle mentality and you just didn't get there, or whether like it's just taken away, what does liberation look like after that? So after the trust, after the LLC, after the estate, after all of that, after all the stocks, the bonds, everything, what does liberation look like? And if you're still not liberated, whether people approach it differently, people approach it through a more of a revolutionary process, or people want to see it through more of a policy process, a civic engagement process. But that is to say, after all that is gone, what does liberation still look like? And so when we talk about education, first and foremost, I think if you are interested in something, go for it. Like if you want to study racial interethnic politics, or if you want to study tech and you want to learn SQL and you want to learn computer science and you want to make the big bucks at Google and Meta, go for it. I'm not mad at you for that, because at the end of the day, you're just studying something that's a passion. But I would say in regards to class, I think regardless of what you study, I think having a politic on class understandings is just important, because we could go more in depth on that, but just understanding the dynamics of what it means to be working class, which now working class is interchangeable for so many different identities. I mean, people will say working class in the form of like, poor, or people who are just working to make a better life for themselves, but it means so many things now. And if you ask someone what working class means, or who is in the working class, you're going to get so many different answers. But that is to say, is that study what you want. If you want to be a big business wig, go for that. If you want to be in tech, go for that. If you want to do human rights work, go for that. But I think having a class analysis, it's just good for anyone. It doesn't even have to necessarily be related to your work, but just having a class analysis is great. And you may not change your mind. You may think capitalism is the answer, and that is that person's choice. I don't believe capitalism is the answer. But if you believe that capitalism is the answer, then I would just say, I'm jokingly serious, but make sure you're paying your taxes and you're spreading the wealth if you're gonna be a subscriber to capitalism. That's all I got to say about that.
Yeah, no, but I wanted to raise that because I think that I just graduated college last year, and I constantly saw these two schools of thought surrounding how it means to give back to the community. There were some people, and I think a lot of people did not address it with the nuance and also with the complexity and the ability to hold space for individual interests and goals the way you did. So I just want to shout you out for that, because I rarely do hear that nuanced understanding. I often hear sellout if you go here, right? We get to that. My podcast is real, so we're gonna get it. We're gonna get into it today. Sell out if you go here, and then I will hear. We said the word today, hotep, if you study gender studies and racial ethnic studies and inequality studies. And I think that we don't understand that both sides need each other. I will automatically say both sides need each other. I mean, God, I tried to blend that social education with my business education, and that's a huge reason why I do what I do today. So what I would say is I want us to become more open as a human race to even things that are outside of our interests. And that curiosity, that's where innovation happens, when we merge fields and we collide. So what I would say is that both sides need each other. With regards to Black capitalism, I agree. Capitalism is not going to get us out of this. However, I can't say that I don't want to see Black people succeed, because I think that is necessary. And if financial is the way that you get your foot through the door to build an institution that can help us, absolutely. I'm not knocking that. And I think that it's all about knowing what your path is and where you fit in the ecosystem. You talked about, is it a more revolutionary mindset, or is it a more, a policy mindset? Because we need everyone in this. I would say, to get out of this, we need everyone in this. So I really do love that. So I want to talk about this thing of like the pursuit of happiness for Black people. One of my favorite movies is The Pursuit of Happiness with Will Smith. And, it's such a great movie. You probably have watched it. I want to know, since we're on this topic of like Black capitalism and also success and all these other things, what do you think people of color need to be happy in the United States? Do you think the pursuit of happiness belongs to us as well?
Wow, that's an amazing question. So first and foremost, the pursuit of happiness definitely belongs to us. But I also want to be clear that I do not subscribe that the pursuit of happiness is this idea that's in the Constitution, right? Or the Bill of Rights. Let's just say the founding documents, right? Because I don't want to sound uneducated. But the founding documents, let's just say the founding documents, I don't subscribe to that pursuit of happiness, because by definition, that pursuit of happiness was not meant for Black folks. Really, it wasn't meant for any BIPOC people, really, if we're being honest. But it definitely wasn't meant for Black folks, especially considering this or Black or Indigenous, especially considering how the the original colonies were created. So I think that we have to devise our own pursuit of happiness. And I think this also is a great linkage to your previous point is, yes, I love seeing Black people have nice things. I love seeing Black people get their foot in the door and have a seat at the table or whatever that is. But I'm reminded, I recently just got back from a humanitarian brigade in the Caribbean, and I won't say too much more about that, but for anyone who knows those words, they can put two and two together. But I was recently in a humanitarian brigade in the Caribbean, and we had talked about, like, what in the world, like what is a water right? Like, how can you privatize water? And of course, that's linked to like land back conversations and linked to like, extractive economy conversations. But what does that even mean? And, you would ask someone like, oh, well, I have rights to water, so people don't steal my water, right? But what are the conditions that were made that would require someone to steal water, right? What are those conditions? And you could probably, list those conditions if you ask anyone, right? Whether it's industrialization, whether it's capitalism, whether it's, extractive economies, whether it's, developers taking over different parts of the land, right? And I just say that to say is that when we talk about why is it so cathartic to see Black people have nice things? Why is it so cathartic to see Black people in boardrooms? Why is it so cathartic to see Black people in certain spaces, right? But again, what were the conditions that were made to make it so cathartic? I mean, if you ask other identities, it may seem fairly normal, right? And if we're going back to representation too, well, maybe like if you ask someone, maybe my family hasn't been in those boardrooms, so it's exciting to see my family. But also, I've seen people that look like me in these rooms. I've seen people that look like me in these spaces, and so for me, it's kind of normalized. So I say that to say, when we look at conditions, what's been represented, what's been normalized, and what are the conditions that were created to make seemingly normalized things seem extraordinary to other people, right? And so I wanted to start there, or not start there, but I wanted to link that in regards to that. But so when I think about what it looks like for us to pursue happiness, I think, so again, when I asked the people in the Caribbean, when I was interviewing them for my research, what does it look like? If you could be guaranteed three things, what would it look like? And each of their answers, and granted, this place in the Caribbean is under very different circumstances, but their answers were always live, breathe, and thrive. Those three words were always included in their answers. And so for different people, that looks differently, living, breathing, and thriving. But for Black people, I think that's the ultimate pursuit of happiness. And again, whether it's a class conversation, whether it's a policy conversation, whether it's a healthcare conversation or an educational conversation, or whether it's just the ability to not have to work to live. And, I don't mean to sound like a broken record, but I think if you ask 10 different Black folks what it means to live, breathe, and thrive, what does it mean to achieve happiness, you're going to get 10 different answers, right? And I think what it boils down to is when everyone's needs are met. Now, what are those needs? I think, we can obviously implement food, water, shelter. So access to food, access to nutritional food, right? Not just like food just for the sake of having food. Access to nutrition, access to water, if we're going to talk about like water rights, right? Access to housing, access to healthcare. Because frankly, not everyone wants to be educated. And I know like that may sound like a jarring term, but we talk about a world now where like college isn't for everybody, right? We talk about a world where we are going back to supporting this idea of going to trade school or just learning from unconventional means. So that is to say, is that what does it mean to live in your community, whether for community that means your racial community, your cultural community, your immediate neighborhood, your city, the culture of your city. What does it mean to live in your community and just live, breathe, and thrive safely? Because I think there's also another aspect to that, right? You can live, breathe, and thrive, but are you safe doing so, right? If we're talking about black capitalism and how black capitalism will not save us, you can do all the trips to Dubai, you can do all the LLCs, you can do all of the business stuff, but are you safe doing so? Like, and whether that word, you code that word for policing, whether you code that word for for the state of like who owns what, right? But are you safe in living, breathing, and thriving? And I think I'll stop right there before I go too much on a tangent.
No, so I'm here. Okay, I'm hearing a lot of things that you said. So number one, normalization, right? You talked about the fact that we get this high off of seeing, for example,
Mm,
like LeBron being on the Forbes list. Why? Because these things have been essentially taken from the majority of us. I think the average black person, or it's been predicted the average black family will have zero median wealth in the year 2050. So when we're operating under scarcity, the few representations that we do see, we get a high from them, and then that becomes our aspiration as well. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but because of the lack of normalization, sometimes we make these accomplishments bigger than bigger than they need to be. And then that fuels our individualism when we really do need more collectivism. So that, and I had that conversation with somebody on this podcast. So that's one thing you're talking about. Two, I think you're talking a lot about the fact that there, and I talk about it with identity all the time. There's the barriers to access, and then there's the barriers to success. And there's a DEI framework called the Cannery Code, where we talk about the access barriers and the success barriers. If you and some of them intersect, right? So for example, if you live in a food desert, you do not have access to fresh food, but that also destroys
mhm.
your ability to perform well in school, have good health, live a long life. um if because you do not have access to fresh food, you're at risk for a whole bunch of other things. So I think it's about understanding that there's this thing about success. Like, we want the barriers to success to be lowered. Not lowered. No, I'm not whoa, not lowered. My bad. Let me circle back on this. We want the barriers to success to be equitable, to account for historical inequities. Like you said, we missed 400 turns on the Monopoly board, which is so crazy. But that's how it is, right? And Monopoly is a great example. We missed 400 turns, right, on the Monopoly board. So we need that the barriers to success to collapse, and we need there to be an equitable path to success that accounts for this historical inequities. But at the same time, if we don't even have access, if we don't even have good schools, how can we compete? If we don't have fresh food, how can we live long? If we don't have loans, how can we build wealth? We don't even have access. And I think about that all the time too. And I think I love this question of the pursuit of happiness, because like you said, happiness means so many things to different people. But at the same time, I think for people of color, what we need is for the barriers to success, for equity to take precedence over equality, and then for access to be normalized. We talk about normalization, for it to be normalized to have basic human necessities. And until that happens, happy will be very vague. It will be a feeling and an emotion, but it will not be a lifestyle and something that we actually can step into. I see a lot of like black boy joy, black girl magic. That's great. We have this emphasis on joy, but there's still so much pain that I think the emphasis on joy does matter, but we also need institutional joy. We need systemic joy. We need joy that exists externally of our internal as well. And I think that's what, until I see that, I don't think there will ever really be a pursuit of happiness
Yeah, I definitely
for
agree with
people
that,
of
and I love
color.
how you take my stream of consciousness and then summarize it so beautifully. But yeah, I totally agree with that. And then also, I would even push further and say, not only not that the barriers should be equitable, but that there should be no barriers at all, right? What does it mean to dismantle those barriers? And again, when we
Yeah.
think about why those conditions were, or why conditions are the way they are, why were those barriers put in place? I think people tend to forget, like, either we don't talk about it enough in a historical context, or people just kind of assume that, um, like, these barriers were happenstance. No, these barriers were brainstormed, and they're scientific, and they were formulated on purpose. Like, these barriers aren't just happenstance. Like, roads that go through black communities aren't just happenstance. Like, they don't just say like, oh, well, this black neighborhood just happens to be in the way, but we really need this road. Like, no, like, there's a reason they're putting roads through black neighborhoods. It isn't happenstance that Black communities in certain rural areas are more prone to cancer because the factory just so happened to be built next there. Like, no, they're like, well, no one cares about this neighborhood, or I don't care about this neighborhood. This neighborhood doesn't mean anything to me. So I'm going to build this factory next to this neighborhood. And if people so happen to get cancer, so be it, right? This isn't like a blase thing. People, and I don't want to like go too much on this capitalism thing because it's more than just capitalism. But people are looking at certain neighborhoods, and whether it's, and I'm focused on Black neighborhoods, but BIPOC neighborhoods in general, people are looking at these neighborhoods, looking at these communities, looking at these people, these humans, and saying like, oh, well, I'm not really too concerned about this community, so I'm just going to build this factory, or I'm just going to put this highway here, or I'm just going to implement this policy that makes it a little bit harder for them, right? Like these are things that are happening on purpose, and I think a lot of people, and that needs to be talked about. And we don't have to get into the CRT thing, but that needs to be talked about because I think you'll see a lot of students, a lot of K through 12 students who are like, oh, well, these things just kind of happen. And now we're just working with what we got. But no, these things were done on purpose. Like there's a reason it's harder for our communities to overcome these barriers. So, I think, I just want to touch on that.
Yeah.
I think these barriers need to be eliminated, dismantled, not just equitable. I think the equity comes from dismantling the barriers, right?
Dismantling. Okay. Yeah, no, I love how you came in and you finished my thought. So the dismantling comes from the equity. Right? And the barriers need to be dismantled for there to be equity. Oh, okay. No, I get it. The barriers need to be dismantled for there to be equity. Okay. No, I like that. I think that's a great way of going about it. So you're actually foreshadowing next season. Want to announce it. Next season will be called Originals. And we're going to go into the origins of things. And I really think it's going to be so good. I do want to have some live sessions as well here in New York City, but I also want to have some panel conversations, and I want us to go into the origins. I think for too long, I've been listening to too many podcasts that discuss surface level everything. Let us go back to the origins. One of my episodes that is I'm really excited to do it. I'm going to finish this season, release this season, and then release the next one. But I'm really excited to do the origin of Black beauty. That is going to be a huge episode. That one is going to be a huge episode, but that's what I'm thinking of when I think of originals. Where did our ideas come from? Around race, around just life in general, around faith. I'm also big on faith. Not Kojic, but I was raised Pentecostal, so very, very, very similar. I'm also big on faith, and I want us to get to the origins. So I'm thinking about calling it originals, and for us to get to the ground level. And I think you're speaking to that when you talk about CRT, when you talk about it being intentional. All of this had an intentional origination. It was not, we're just doing this to do it. It was, I know 400 years from now, this group of people are still going to be stuck because of what was done today in 1619. And it's sickening, but that's really where we're at. Eric, we're going to need a part 2. We're going to need a part 2, and I'm going to need you to come to the originals conversation, one of my originals conversations, because I think that you really do have a very, very nuanced take on these things. And I want to thank you and so many other people who have been on the podcast. This season is great. I can't wait to release it. Who have opened my mind about so many things and are even feeding my creativity around this. We couldn't even touch on your entire story. So yes, y'all, this is a part 1. This conversation will continue. Let me know if you have any. Do you have any departing thoughts?
Absolutely. Well, first and foremost, thank you. I signed me up for all the above. Part 2, 3, 4, 5, originals, part 1, 2, 3, whatever. I really enjoy these conversations, and this isn't really just about me like being a guest on a podcast just so I can say it. For me, it's really about having these conversations, and you are such a great conversationalist and such a great interviewer, and I just really enjoy these conversations. It really does give me life. So thank you, and sign me up. My departing words, I think. Outside of thank you, I think, regardless of who's listening to this, it's our duty to win. We must love each other and support each other, and we have nothing to lose but our chains. And I'll end it off that.
Yeah, okay. Well, y'all, Eric will be back because this was fire. Okay, take care, everybody, on The Purposeful Professional. I will see you. All right, y'all, take care.
Now, this was one of my favorite episodes to shoot. There are these times where the conversation is so good, so authentic, and so real that it literally brings you to a different place, a different world mentally. I really want to thank Eric for being so willing to share himself, his background, and his thoughts with me. These are really the type of episodes and conversations that bring me back to why I do what I do, especially with the current controversy and backlash around diversity, equity, and inclusion. It is an honor for me to advocate in whatever way I can to bring about change and promote ultimately what is right. Who cares if Elon Musk said that DEI is dead? Thanks to leaders like Eric and those who are willing to have these important and impactful conversations, I think diversity, equity, inclusion is very much alive, and I think we will be all right. All right, I'm gonna pull a Kendrick Lamar on y'all. We gonna be all right. Okay, 2024 is here. Excited to bring y'all new episodes, and yes, keep listening, keep growing with us, and keep becoming a purpose lifer. Your purposeful professional life is on the way. It's coming. All right, enough for the manifestation talk. Let's go. And I hope you all will continue to subscribe and follow the podcast. This is Soraya, and we're officially out, the Purposeful Professional. Bye.